and welcome to Friday afternoon. It is a beautiful and sunny day here in Seattle, and I'm excited because I've got some fun stuff for you today. As you know, one of the things that we love to do for our Fridays is to have a look at a company's website and see if we can help them out. And we're going to do just that today. But first of all, you're probably here because you've been thinking about storytelling, maybe storytelling in marketing. The idea that we're going to do a website teardown is appealing because, hey, we've got some practical aspects that we can apply, right? We're going to look at a website, we're going to think about storytelling. So it might be why you're here. And I want to make sure that if that's why you're here, you have a chance to ask questions. And I'm going to fire up the chat app here because if you've got questions, drop them in the chat. I want to make sure that as we're having this conversation, the questions that come to your mind are a part of the conversation. And it's always fun because I love helping people. I love helping people with storytelling. I love helping people with story. And if you are a founder and you are trying to figure out how to make your message work, then today's going to be perfect for you. And I have to apologize for the focus problems of my technology today. The webcam seems to pick random things to focus on occasion. So we'll see. Maybe it's my hands as I move them around. I'm an animated kind of person, so that might we might get a bit of fuzziness from time to time as I put my hands up. So if you're a founder and let's say you've just got Series A and you're riding high and you're thinking, hey, what's next? How do I get to that next level? Then this is going to be perfect for you. If you are a founder and you're responsible for all the people that work for you, all of the investments that you gather, whatever series that you're at or however developed you are, and you feel like something's not quite right, feel like something's not quite working, and you can't quite place your finger on it, that's going to be perfect as well. So you may have come here thinking about storytelling and websites and thinking that Matthew can help with that, and I can. But if you're in any of those groups, then I love to help you. I love to help folks who are innovators, who are committed to not just making a bunch of money and making an exit, nothing wrong with that, but also to do it in a way that's going to create some type of longevity, right? And that's what we love to do. Now, I did mention that kind of storytelling angle. I'm like, hey, maybe you're thinking about storytelling. You're maybe coming here thinking, how can I tell a better story? And that is all legit, and I can't blame you for that. That's exactly how I started on this journey. But I do have some perspective I'm going to share with you today that I'm pretty sure you will end up appreciating, and it will help you in terms of how you actually go and use storytelling, because it's something that underpins that. It's the foundation for that, the architecture of that, if you will. So we're definitely going to be doing that today. And to kick us off, what I want to share with you is not only are we going to do this teardown, right? But we are going to talk a little bit about how you even apply this thing, storytelling, as a tool. And my journey in this started about 13 years ago, 2012. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. And I was hired to be chief storyteller for one of Microsoft's business divisions. And whether it was homepages or persona development or videos or customer case studies, I was on the hook for making sure that everything that we did had a great story. And at the time, Dynamics was fighting not just externally, but internally for mindshare, competing with things like Office and Xbox, as you can imagine. There's some pretty strong storytelling, especially in the latter one. And any corporation has really, it's like what a lot of founders have to do in a startup, and that is getting the ecosystem to care about what you do, in particular after an acquisition. So Microsoft Dynamics was built out of a series of acquisitions, and the team ultimately had to sell that value internally as well as externally. So we had all of these different storytelling challenges that we were tasked with. And when I sat down to actually do the job, get it done, I ended up finding myself in a little bit of a panic. And I don't want you to have to experience that panic. Now, you might wonder, why did you panic, Matthew? What was it? This sounds like a pretty sweet gig. And you know what? I'll tell you what, as a storyteller who's not only written a couple novels and has kept a handwritten journal or diary, however you want to mention it, since February, every day since February 1990. In fact, I've been just on my desk here for a little bit as I've been working to do some transcription. And then on the bookshelf back there, almost 40 years covered by handwritten journaling. So I've been working to understand my story, document my story, going back and reading that, not just recently with the transcription, but at any point, right, I'd find myself wondering, what was I doing on this day? Pick the number of years or decades even ago. So when you think about that context, yeah, it was a sweet gig and it was really, really relevant for me. And I was really excited. So when I sat down to do that job, the first thing I did is I went to go find some frameworks, right? Why reinvent the wheel if somebody's already done something amazing? And the problem is that I couldn't find anything that was appropriate. I couldn't find any frameworks that were not pivoting off of things like the hero's journey, right? The hero's journey, a lot of stuff, tips that come out of Hollywood as well. All of these kinds of things exist out there. And I, like you, initially went to go and try and apply these types of frameworks to business storytelling because that's all that was out there. There was not actually any business storytelling frameworks. And what this meant was, well, I had to become an interpreter of storytelling, and I did. But as I went through that experience and I looked at the complicated frameworks like the hero's journey, I looked at the simple frameworks like beginning, middle, and end, and as you probably have experienced, asked the question, well, where do we start, right? At the beginning. And that's just the first of many, many questions with a simple framework. Because the problem with a simple framework is simple can be abstract, right? And abstract can be a real productivity killer. I don't know about you, but I do have a tendency to go down rat holes when I'm learning something. And there's 3 rat holes here, right? Beginning, middle, and end. What do I put in each one? How do I cover it? Is business, is the end a call to action? Is it the end of the story? Is there some special technique I need to use? So these things were not really helping. And my time at Microsoft, I played this role as story interpreter. But I had this dream. And the dream started because not only was I loving doing what I was doing as a storyteller, but I was getting invited to help teams from across Microsoft with storytelling. I was chief storyteller for Microsoft Dynamics. It was a relatively unheard of role at the time. And even though storytelling found its way into things like advertising, marketing, presentations, it wasn't really viewed explicitly as an intentional tool. You'd find little pockets in the executive boardrooms where consultants would be helping with that part of a problem solving, right? You might have a McKinsey or a Bain who are helping with some kind of relook at the organization, some type of recommendations. And within that, there might be the identification of a lack of story or a lack of emotional engagement. But beyond that, chief storyteller wasn't something that really existed. And so I was excited to be invited to help other teams out. And as that started happening more and more, I started to have the dream. And the dream that I had was, put quite simply, I would love to do this for more than just the company I'm working for. Even though there was diversity within Microsoft itself, the thought of helping founders and inventors of technologies and businesses beyond the walls of one company was really exciting for me. Some people get surprised knowing that I work in storytelling and often thinking that's just marketing, which I would encourage you not to think that way. And hopefully after today, you'll have changed your mind a little bit. But I'm also a computer scientist. I have a computer science degree. And when I was at Microsoft, I did something rather unheard of for marketers. And that was I actually got a patent. When you get a patent at Microsoft, you get a marble cube. It's got some weight to it. And this was for something called Customer Engagement Accelerator. Now, I have always been excited and focused on experiences, right? Even when I wasn't thinking explicitly about storytelling in business. And so Customer Engagement Accelerator was a CRM system that was specifically intended to help companies do a much better job at customer engagement. And you can see that pattern along with a lot of other development that has continued to be implemented in Microsoft's products around customer engagement, customer support, CRM, you name it. I was getting pulled in all these directions internally, and I had this dream to do it externally. And then after a family tragedy, I was forced to look at life differently and realize that life is indeed very short. And at that moment, I steeled myself to actually found a company. But first, I spent a year helping a small local agency double its revenue, learning the ropes of running a small business. And then in 2017, I founded Go Narrative. And as soon as I founded it, I started applying what I knew from everything from storytelling to product marketing to sponsorship marketing and beyond, and using that to help companies with their narratives, to help companies build that emotional connection with their audience. And through that, being able to figure out how we could start to actually implement this in a more structured way. So I came back to thinking about those frameworks that I had been considering. And because of that, ended up finding my Goldilocks. And that was a way of approaching this. It wasn't too complicated, isn't too simple, and ultimately gives you the tool to be able to build stories into everything that you're doing, including your strategy. And your strategy is your story. And the best company's story is strategy. And that is a quote from Ben Horowitz. And yet again, as you can see, we've got all of the brightest minds when it comes to thinking about how do we engage with our customers. Always it comes to include story. You might wonder why is that the case? Why do we find ourselves often bumping into this thing called story and then often bumping back out of it again? Well, it's because storytelling isn't just something that we tell. That's the expression, right? If you think about an expression of something, if you think about that, the verb, if you will, the action, then it's got to happen to something. It's got to happen around or related to something. And storytelling, that is the story. And that is a really important thing that I want you to bear in mind. It's not just this thing called storytelling. And in fact, if you focus on the storytelling, you're missing a beat in terms of the power that you have when you understand and have some sense of control over your story. And that is exactly why I do these streams, because I get to share with you, I get to talk about how all of this starts. And this Goldilocks framework starts with something that we all know and love. And that is this idea of needing something or wanting something. And in fact, as a founder, you will have created your firm based on this very fact. As a founder, you will have identified something that people need, that people want, that's missing in some way, shape, or form. And you will have found a way to help with that. So you've started that. You understand, you get this. You are in the thick of this element of the Goldilocks framework that I'm sharing with you. And I like to call this desire. Now, what do I mean by that? Can it be positive? Is it positive? Is it negative? What are we talking about here? It's as simple as wanting a cup of water or having a splinter in your hand and needing to remove it, all the way up to something as complicated as wanting to retire on a high note, or something as profound as changing a market forever, or something as impactful as changing the way that people see something or do something. When you think about some of the biggest innovations in the past 50 years, they've all done that, and they've all started somewhere, and they've all tapped into something, right? And that something is either an explicit desire or an implicit need that hasn't been called out yet. And of course, we can always point to the founders that are renowned for being able to do this. Steve Jobs was very good at identifying how to take technology and not only package it up in a way that was very consumable, but to connect that package to something inside of us. And when he launched the iPod was a perfect example. The 500,000 songs in your pocket. Wow. Up until that point, for most people, 500,000 songs meant a very, very, very tall stack of CDs, right? Being able to fit that many songs into your pocket was an absolute watershed moment. Now, what people will often forget is at the time, and I should have my prop handy here. I actually couldn't find it for the show today, but I've got a Creative Jukebox Zen. And I was one of the people at the time who was early in the market, right? I was an early adopter. I was prepared to go out there because I had the desire to do this thing differently, right? I had MP3s. I wanted to put my CD collection in my pocket, and I knew how to do it. And I bought that Creative Jukebox Zen on a business trip to the United States when I still lived in England. And boy, oh boy, did I love that thing. But it's not something that many of the people in my life would want to use, because it did take a little bit of fiddling around with, and you had to go through some steps. And so as a techie, it didn't matter for me. I was into that stuff, right? And part of my desire was doing that stuff. And so talking to me as somebody who was interested in that, you could talk about that stuff, right? But if you tried talking to my sisters, my best friends, let alone my mother, none of those people in my life at the time would have really been prepared to go down that route. I even remember my housemates being blown away by it, but then even one of them, who is super into music and has got me into all sorts of bands, looked at that and was like, yeah, no, right? So if you're talking to him, then you have to talk to a different type of desire. And so all of it starts with that. It all starts with that desire. Now, when we want something, does something happen instantly? If you think about the last time that you wanted something, did you just get it? Well, in the past month, what have you been working on at work? What ideas have you had? What plans have you laid out? And how have you approached getting to those goals, getting to those desires, those wants, those needs, right? Guarantee you that in most of those cases, something stood in the way. A roadblock, a literal roadblock. Maybe you wanted to go somewhere and there was a roadblock, and it hadn't been put on Google Maps yet, or a metaphorical roadblock in a project where it turns out that you didn't have the information you needed, or you didn't have the technical skills you needed, or you didn't have the buy-in or commitment from the person on a certain team that you needed. And all of these things can be roadblocks to us getting what we want. So for any desire out there, there's a whole cacophony of difficulties that stand in the way. And those difficulties are really important for us to understand. As a founder, you will have thought about that, right? You will have thought about the available options. I did it. If you think back to the hero's journey, and I was thinking about what stood in the way, and I talked about that with you today, that stands in the way of you tapping into this thing, this tool called story. And again, remember, I talk about story intentionally, not storytelling. I do talk about storytelling. I love storytelling. I love Hollywood. I love movies. Absolutely adore the new season of Andor. I can't get over it. I absolutely love it. It is fantastic. I'm drawn into that world, and then repeatedly bumped out of it when my youngest decides that he's going to be disruptive, or my boys fight during the show and we have to hit pause and explain to them, we really want to watch this, and you are standing in the way of us watching this. And last night it got crazy. So we hadn't watched it on Tuesday because we had sports. I think it was track meet one day and then a soccer game the next day. As a parent of a teen and an almost teen, there's a lot of that type of activity in our life. And I was just so excited to sit down and watch Andor and do that with a family. We'd watch season 1 together. We watch a lot of shows and movies as a family to share that experience. And Andor was one that I was particularly excited to have on the list, being a massive Star Wars fan and having met George Lucas twice. I am, as you can imagine, pretty excited when a series like Andor is on the horizon. And so last night, not only were the boys fighting and disrupting the show, our youngest decided, in his current Harry Potter obsession, that when he went out of the room to go get some tissues, he had having some allergies, wanted to go get tissue and come back. He didn't just come back with tissues. He came back with a Ron Weasley wig on, a robe, and a wand. And he proceeded to do a performance, a very goofy performance, where apparently every time he tried to use a spell, he got injured. So it was absolutely hilarious, but I didn't want to tell him because we'd made it very clear that he was being disruptive when they were just arguing on the sofa. And now we had a full-blown performance in front of us. And hey, I was tired. I'd spent the whole day driving at 160 miles per hour and pulling 1.65 Gs on the racetrack, and had been up since 5 a.m. and really just was so excited to sit down and watch Andor. And now I had this performance to deal with. So that was a real difficulty for me last night in terms of being able to enjoy the show. And as with anything you want and any difficulty, you have to find a way out of that. Now, where people often fall down on this is they fall down on the solution. I'm going to say it now. The end of a story is not just about the solution. The end of the story is not just about your product or your service. That is a trap that I see people fall into time and time again. The next step in this journey, the third thing that you need to remember after desire and difficulty, is how do you help them find their way through the morass, find their way through the deep, dark forest that they're stuck in, find their way through the challenging situation, the stakeholder problems, the technology problems, the knowledge problems? How do you help them through that? How do you help them get to the other side? And that is about helping them untangle the knot. And that is very different. If you imagine that the tool you're bringing is something that's going to help somebody untangle a knot, as opposed to being the one and only thing that is the end of the story, you will immediately start thinking about how you help untangle that knot. A great way to think about it is, imagine you've got a pocket knife. In fact, I've got one right here. Imagine you've got a pocket knife, and this one has got a big blade that has got a feature that locks into place, which is important with certain types of knife usage. And it's got a bottle opener, a can opener, and it's got a corkscrew, and it has got an awl, which is this sharp thing with a hole in it. And I believe the original primary intended use for this was to punch holes in leather and thread through leather. So here we've got a pocket knife. It's got a bunch of features, right? Now, I bought this pocket knife in Austria, and part of it was getting a good price, buying it closer to the source. But it's also, we were staying in this lovely Austrian town, and as you do when you're traveling, you do a bit of shopping, but looking around, got some lovely tea, some lovely Austrian mountain teas, and I'd noticed that there were pocket knives, and I've got a pocket knife that's the thick one, which has got like every tool you can imagine. And I wanted one that I could have as an everyday carry. And in fact, that is exactly why it's in my pocket today, because I have been earlier today as a break, I was doing some vacuuming. That's right. And the vacuum cleaner needed to have the brush dealt with. You know how it kind of gets all the bits of string and bits of hair or whatever in it. And so I was able to use my knife and very quickly solve that problem, very specific problem. So I wanted to have a clean office. What stood in the way was the vacuum cleaner wasn't running properly. And how did I untangle that knot? I used the blade to cut through the string and so on. Now, why do I share this with you? Because I don't want you to be like 10-year-old Matthew when his kite string was in a knot and use scissors to cut through that string. I don't know what I was thinking, but as I watched the kite drift off into the sky, the evening sky, never saw it ever again, I learned a valuable lesson, right? And I want you to be able to take that lesson away. And that is, it's not about getting those scissors out and cutting through people's problems. It's about helping them find a way through, helping them find what they need and find their way through, around, over, under the thing that's standing in their way. And how do you help with that? How does your tool or how does your service help with that? And as a founder, this is super important, because what a lot of founders fail to realize is when they're getting that early funding, when they're engaging with, even with investors, a lot of that is based around the Matthew Creative Zen story that I told you a few minutes ago. And that is who you're talking to, what they want, what stands in their way. And a lot of the people that founders talk with early on in a company's existence are people that share that mindset. And you can go quite far to a point with people with the same mindset. But a lot of companies then hit a brick wall because they don't think outside of that mindset. And you know, one company that comes to mind is Xerox. So Xerox were very much in that space. They were very much in the the technical prowess, the huge amount of success. They actually developed one of the first graphical user interfaces that they never commercially successfully landed at any type of scale. Then another company came along and did that. That was Apple with Steve Jobs. And if you only talk to that original group, that original mindset that's very similar to your mindset, you will find yourself in a place where you're not expanding beyond it. Now, another way that you may have learned about this or thought about this is the idea of crossing the chasm. And I used some of that terminology earlier, didn't I? Because I talked about being an early adopter. And as an early adopter, I have certain interests and certain needs, and those are different to somebody who is in the early majority. And with my creative Zen example, that was, I had an interest in music. I also had an interest in digitizing music. I had an interest in devices. I had an interest in setting up devices and all of the steps that you'd have to go through, those types of hoops to make things happen. And if you took my housemate at the time and you looked at his interests, he was also interested in music. He also would love to be able to have his entire music collection right on hand or in pocket. But he didn't have those other interests, and creatives' attempts to communicate with him would have fallen flat, and they did. And that is exactly what set Steve Jobs and Apple up for success with the iPod, is that they were then able to speak to the people in the next market, right, in that early majority. And the crossing the chasm is a term because you have to make that jump. You have to make the jump from talking to the people that already know what you're talking about and have a similar interest to you, to talking beyond that. And it's not just about your consumers or your customers. It can also be your investors, and investors who are savvy and who are thinking, what are the next steps here? How do we expand this market? They are going to be the ones that are going to insist on you understanding this. And so untangling that knot, that's the third of, so we had desire, we had difficulty, and we have the third D, and that is the denouement, which is what I pull together into the power of 3D story. That's what those 3 Ds are. And that word that I just said, you might be thinking, wait, what was that word? What was it? It was denouement. So denouement is a French word, and it means the untangling of the knot. And I actually had an experience just yesterday about my own denouement, my own untangling of the knot. Yesterday, I was on the racetrack. I was driving at very high speeds. I hit my personal record for Pacific Raceways. I hit 160 miles per hour. And I was having fun, but something wasn't quite coming together for me. I think it might have been partially caused by the last time I was on that track. It was very wet and I was having to drive very differently. Being wet and having slick tires on didn't help, but it could have been that. It could have been something else. It could have been some other mindset. Basically, what I was doing was I found that I was braking very hard in the straight line to shed off that 160 miles per hour, for example, going into turn 2. So going into turn 2, you've got to get down from whatever top speed you're at down to about 70, 80 miles per hour for that corner. And depending on the type of car you're in, front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, the balance of the car, you name it, you're going to approach the corner slightly differently. And the main thing you're trying to do is to find the point on that corner where you're able to put your foot down and go in as straight a line as possible, as fast as possible. And that's called the apex. So any of you who have watched F1 will have heard this term. Anybody who knows motor racing will know exactly what I'm talking about. And so as a race car driver, your responsibility is really 2 things. Number 1 is weight management, managing that weight as it shifts around from high speed to lower speeds. And another big part of your job is every single corner, making sure that you're finding where that apex line, that moment is. And it's not always obvious. And it changes based on the properties of the vehicle as well, because how you approach that can be very different. So yesterday, the type of car that I was in, rear engine, rear wheel car, its dynamics actually allow to attack the apex earlier than my brain was telling me. Not that I was new to this car. I'm not, but for some reason I had it in my head yesterday that I needed to be shedding more of that speed off and then setting the line up a bit straighter. And I was not having as much fun as I could because I had to shed off a lot of that speed, and that creates dynamics at the front of the vehicle that I was experiencing that I didn't experience last dry day. And then that set me up on a line which was not going to give me the most speed coming out of the corner. Well, as luck would have it, an instructor opened up, and a French chap came up to me, Nico, and he offered for his services to come and join me. And so Nico, French, denouement, French for untangling the knot. Nico helped me untangle the knot. And I was able to tap into my mental reserves, go back to one of the techniques that you may have heard of if you've ever got behind the wheel of a high performance vehicle, and that is trail braking, and started to employ that, started to approach the entry to the corner slightly differently. I was going wider before, I came in a bit more central on the corner, and I ended up going more centrally through the corner with the rear of the car being closer on the limit and finding that apex sooner, and boom, got smoother and got faster coming out the corner. And so Nico helped me untangle that knot. So there we go. That is what we're talking about here. But all of that storytelling, that little story that I just told you, that actually I wasn't planning on telling you, and I made it up on the spot. All I had to do was think, what did I want? What was standing in the way? And how did I untangle that knot? And it enabled me on the spot to tell that story. But as a founder or anybody who's got that responsibility for making things make sense, if you sit down and you think about not just your story, but your team's story, your partner's story, your customer's story, your client's story, and you use this framework, it gives you that opportunity to break it down and understand it. So me telling you that story was me expressing, recounting what happened yesterday, but it exists. Whether I told you it or not, it exists. There are stories in your business. There are stories of yours that exist that aren't understood and aren't therefore able to be expressed. There are stories that exist in your customers, just dying to be told. And this is the power of 3D story. It is the ability to rapidly break it down, understand those key components, and give you the necessary sequencing to even tell it. Now, it's just the tip of the iceberg. And when you think about storytelling, you might think marketing. And we are going to look at a website today. We have our target of the week that we've picked on. They have not been consulted on this, but hey, it's a public website, right? And with all due respect, every time we do one of these teardowns, I want to mention a few things. Number one, you're doing all you can do. You're doing your best, and you are juggling a lot, and you can't focus on everything all the time. That means that despite wanting the best outcomes, because you can't focus on everything, sometimes the ball gets dropped, and that's okay, because you have the ability to stop, pick up the ball, and figure out how to run with it. And when you're a founder of a business that's been fighting for funding, finding great success, and talking to people that are in a similar mindset or story mindset as you, it can be easy to keep talking in the same way. And when it comes to putting a website together, it can be very much like that. Another thing is you might not be the founder, but you might be responsible for that website. Maybe you're the CMO or the marketing person, however, your startup is handling it. And you are juggling more than just a website. Yeah. You're planning events and helping with speeches, maybe, and figuring out how you're going to do your ad buys and what platforms you're going to do your engagements on, and you name it. So you got a lot on your plate, and the website is one of them. So with all that in mind, we are going to have a look at a website today, and we're going to have a bit of fun. So we are going to use a custom AI resource to actually help us do our teardown. Now, we've actually been using this in the background, but today I am actually going to share that with you, and it's going to result in us seeing some live storytelling stuff. So we'll go ahead and mix things up here a little bit. And we are going to share the screen. And you'll see who we're picking on for today. Okay. Bridgetown Research. So here we've got Bridgetown Research's website. Bridgetown Research have been doing pretty well past couple of years, burst out onto the scene in about 2023, based here in Seattle, with some pretty storied and impressive credentials from their founding team. And what we're going to share with you here today is our experience on the website and how we could perhaps change that. So when we look at this, I always immediately start to look for a couple of things, right? One of the things is people. Am I seeing people here, right? Another thing is, am I seeing emotion? Am I seeing feelings of any type? Now, remember, emotions aren't fluffy. They're functional. Emotions are what I like to call the emo pyramid, that communication sits on top of motivation, and motivation sits on top of emotions, and emotions sit on top of feelings. Going in reverse, that is, feelings are physical sensations that we have in our body. When you have a splinter in your finger, well, splinter in your finger means you've got an actual physical pain that is bothering you, and you have to solve it, right? It's like, ow, I can feel that. But those feelings are not reserved for those types of sensations. Our feelings are a big part, a vital part of how we experience every single day. Those are things like excitement. Those are things like stress, right? Think about the last big stress you had at work. Think about how your body felt, right? There's all sorts of, maybe you felt tight. Maybe you felt like on edge. Maybe you were worried and you had some anxiety type of feelings, or you got to shake, the internal kind of shaking, or maybe you were going to get up on stage and you had the butterflies in your stomach. There's all sorts of feelings that we have in our body around the experiences that we have in the world. How do we process those, understand those, and communicate about those? That's the emotional layer, right? That's when we start to add our intellect, our human communications abilities to describe those butterflies in our stomach, for example, or anxiety or fear or excitement or anticipation or apprehension, right? these emotions are functional, right? They are functional not only because they help communicate how we're actually experiencing life. Hey, we're all good, or we are not all good. And they're functional because they then feed into motivation, right? And our motivation meets the motivation of the person that's communicating to us. And if we're a company seeking to communicate, then we have got a motivation, but we need to understand what the motivation is of the person we're communicating to. So when I look at these websites, I ask myself the question, what emotion do I see? And based on that, how likely are we to engage with people who are new to the category or the company? Sort of that first bucket. And the second bucket being people who are already in the category or know the company and are further down in that sales purchasing cycle. So if we look at this, we've got analyzed businesses with superhuman speed and precision. Gather and analyze primary and secondary data at unprecedented scale, speed, and cost efficiency. So what is this speaking to? Is it speaking to people? Is it speaking to emotions? We've got some stuff happening on the side over here showing us how it works. So demo forward, making sure that we know what's going on. Last week, when we did the teardown for Descript, one of the things that I said that Descript did a great job of was managing to get their product into the minds of the visitor. And it was what the product did. So the what, the how, and the what being the tool itself, but the how being that process, right? And also we talked about how they were able to deliver that. And they did it because they were talking about the why. So here we've got analyzed businesses with superhuman speed and precision. What does that mean? And is it talking to our emotions in any way? Is it going to motivate us to act? And therefore, as a communicator, can we tap into that motivation? Well, I think there's something here. Certainly, we anybody that needs to do analysis of businesses is going to find that appealing. So it's not talking about the person explicitly, but it's talking about the how of the thing they're doing, and is going to be positioning the what of what that is, which is this what Bridgetown offers. Superhuman speed and precision. So that's not about me individually as a person, right? Or you or anybody potentially. It's again, we're still that adjacent layer. We're still at that kind of motivational layer. We haven't got down to the emotional layer yet, right? So we're still in motivation. So here we've got this is very typical of a lot of founding messages, a lot of early stage companies, Series A getting ready to fight for Series B, is they've done a pretty good job of communicating that motivation. And then we've got some more gather and analyze primary and secondary data, unprecedented scale, speed, and cost efficiency. Okay. So, and then if we go further down the page, we partner with distinctive institutions across industry sectors. So this is the social proof element, private equity event, social proof. We're funded, AI to find proprietary deals, build conviction and value. So if you're talking to somebody that gets it, if I am the person you're talking to, and if I am somebody that is using AI tools, is doing analysis, and I am, by the way, in business analysis, then you're talking to the group that I'm in, that you're in, and you've earned that right to kind of get that far down to the conversation. But remember, not everybody that comes to this website is going to be in that group. And it might be okay when you're in the early adopters, when you're getting Series A, to communicate like this. But as you think about moving forward, you want to start thinking about going beyond just communicating the motivation, definitely beyond communicating just the product, and to start thinking about what those emotions are. Make sense? Now, remember, the right tools matter. The way we communicate matters, and why we communicate matters. One of the things that's so important in all of this and should speak to anybody out there who is a founder, and that is, why are you doing what you're doing? Why don't you hit snooze in the morning? Why do you get up and power through and do the magic that you do every day? That engine is at the core of you, and it can take time to understand what that is. But doing so is tapping into your emotional drivers beyond the feelings that you experience on any given day and into the feelings that you experience with a profound depth because they're at the core of who you are. Now, for me, the fact that the first 18 months of my life or so, I spent a lot of time locked in an attic bedroom when we moved to the north of England, because the house we lived in was such a terrible state and it was the only safe place in the house. That forged me as somebody that desperately needed to understand the story that was going on around him so we could communicate effectively and interface with his primary caregiver in a way that was my mother, that was going to be as effective as possible. And that forged me, right? You have forging moments in your story. Luckily for me, I've got book after book after book of these that I can actually go back and analyze. And I'm actually doing that and using AI to do that. And it's fascinating. You might not have that level of depth, but finding your why, and this is why I became a Why Institute certified coach. Finding your why will give you a huge boost in being able to do this. It's why we recently launched the Surgical Story Sprint. And that is because I want to help people who find themselves being told, nice try. Nice try, Terry. That was the character that I had in mind when I came up with this. It was Terry did the pitch and it landed flat. But why did it land flat? We made it through. We made it through Series A, okay, but now we're just struggling. We can't seem to get our story straight. And if you're responsible for doing that, you're in a place where you need to unlock it. So that's why we came up with a surgical story sprints, 45 minutes. And I will help you understand your why and your story and give you a couple of actionable things written down that you can then take and go and work on, because understanding your why is vital. Now, we do more beyond that, but it's recently why we launched this. It's a very accessible investment, and it's something that you can immediately start using in all of your pitches, all of your conversations, right? And that's a part of the problem that I see when I look at the website. Okay, so I promised you we were going to have a look at something AI related. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So here we've got the website Teardown GPT. And what we're going to do is we're going to put the Bridgetown website into it, and we're going to have a look at what it comes back with. So anytime you find yourself doing something 2 or 3 times, it's probably worth putting it into a custom GPT or a Claude project, or the various options that are out there in the different AI platforms, because it will help speed you along and become a little tool in your tool belt, just like storytelling is. And I love using AI as a thought partner. I have it interview me, have it challenge me, help me see the gaps in my thinking. And I also have it as a doer to help me speed things along, right? And this is kind of a bit of a mix of the two as it's doing its work here, working away on a Friday afternoon. A lot of people throw in crazy, silly requests to the Chat GPT servers, perhaps. It's overload town. Let's have a look I'm gonna have a look in another window here and see if we're experiencing the same thing. Okay. Well, okay. Any of you who grew up in the UK will remember a show called Blue Peter. And on Blue Peter, they would go to do some cooking or something like that, basically like a demo, right? And they would say, here's one I prepared earlier. So here's one I prepared earlier. And here we can see a couple of things. One is we've got the Power of 3D Story, the emo pyramid, which I shared earlier as well. And we've got a couple of other frameworks here. That should be a registered trademark. I'm not sure why it's doing the TM there. But here we go. So what is the story Teardown GPT telling us? It's telling us a couple of things. One, that it's intellectually impressive. Can't fault it on that. But it's emotionally inert. Now, remember, with all due respect, you're talking to a specific group, and you have been, and now you're thinking about going beyond that, right? And if you're bridge partners, you're in that situation. B, maybe you're marketing, whoever's responsible for the website, you've got a lot on your plate. You're a startup, probably limited on the resources, right? So take this feedback with a pinch of salt, and hopefully it's useful. And this is not an attack. This should be taken as a friendly challenging of the status quo, which is my why, by the way, challenge the status quo of the current website. Now, what else do we see here? So we uncover deep consumer insights that can build winning brands. Bridgetown is a boutique consultancy that behaves behavioral science to brand strategy. Well, I would actually challenge that. And if it was working, I would go back and have a look at that, because I believe it's got some elements wrong there. But we see there's no pain felt, right, of what our customers are, visceral stakes, no urgent transformation. It's definitely got sleek minimalist design, right? And that demo running creates some trust. But language is expert, right? So how can we fix this? Now, this isn't just about what the customer thinks. This is also about what the businesses that are being analyzed by Bridgetown, what we can learn from them. Yeah. Here we go. Can't afford to guess. You can't afford. So here we're starting to bridge, no pun intended, the emotion or the motivation to emotional, right? Can't afford is motivational, but it starts to tap into that emotional layer. How do we feel when we can't afford something that we need to do? And then guessing what our customer thinks. We're starting to really turn up the volume on the motivation from a customer perspective. That pit in your stomach before a launch, right? What did I say about the butterflies, right? That's that feeling that we're getting down there into the feeling. We kill it. We have the insights that feels like deja vu. It's another feeling, that sense of having something has been the same way before, that we've been here before. Overall site effectiveness, authority, simplicity, can't fault it there. Flat emotional topography, underutilized denouement. And then that's what's that saying? It's still kept quite abstract. It's not. There's no case study there. There's no kind of like showing us the actual story behind what that demo was, for example. And so when we go down here, it gives us some scoring, right? So what's there, what's strong, what's absent, and then the morals, the essential emotions, and the truths that our customers may have. Could lean into truths like data doesn't equal understanding, right? That's a truth for this market, whether they're early adopters or early majority. Most research is too shallow to be useful. And then we've got the TRIPS framework, which is our narrative level framework. So what transformation? There's some of that implied in the headline in terms of the speed of things, which implies slow to fast, but it's not called out explicitly. Reasons to believe. This is about like the proof points, right? Emotional proof points and data proof points. Innovation, like it didn't really come across how this was different to others, right? And then of course, because we didn't acknowledge what those challenges were, and we couldn't start building a story about it, but we didn't talk about the problems of getting going, the problems that crop up along the way, the problems of finding success and then having competition, that you might be using Bridgetown research to do that business analysis for. And then there was very little stories. So add some friction. That would be a recommendation. Use level 3 and 4 primary language, right? Tap into the emotional exhaustion, the pressure from leadership. Narratify the case studies, maybe some video up there. Talk to some people. Why do people invest in this, right? Because maybe they can tell you some stories for that Series B when you're heading towards Series B that maybe you're not even thinking about yet, but they saw it, right? That's one of the reasons they're investing. Look for the people that understand the market that you're in, those early adopters and the early majority, because they are out there. Some people will have some good advice. Make sure you're listening to it on that. And of course, we love to help with figuring this stuff out, specifically around that story element. So, and then we can bring some more of the morals, essential emotions, and truths in. So that is what we see when we look at this website a bit differently. And it's what we see when we look at any website like this, right? And it's the fact that when we're authentic, we don't need to have a big creative fancy website. We're connecting with what those feelings are in our target audience. And we're doing that in a way that uses the right words and connects into the story. Because here's the thing. It's not about storytelling. Storytelling is just a part of the puzzle. It's about story, and it's about understanding story. Because when you understand story, you can connect better. It actually will help not just authenticity improvements, it'll help you build empathy. It'll help you connect, and you'll be able to connect because you understand better and demonstrate that you understand better. And that creates the reciprocal element of the connection, because you spend the time to understand your customer's story. But where should you start? You should start with your story. As a founder, your individual story matters. You're the reason why the company exists. Yes, you've had help, and nobody can do it alone. But you have a story that has led you to being where you are today. And when you find your why, when you understand that, it gives you that hook, that place to start building that control of your story. And when you control your story and you understand your story, that is the living, breathing use of the product that gives you the ability to understand the story in other people. And it's not just your customers or your investors, it's your team, your partners, and anybody else that's involved in your company being successful. So story is the bridge. And today we looked at that bridge with Bridge Partners. I love looking at these homepages and helping with these teardowns because it's such a visceral and real experience. It's very tangible for all of us to go to whatever website it is, have a look at it, and to look at it through the 3D lens. Who are they talking to? What do those people want? What stands in the way? And how do we untangle it? And when we do that, we're looking at the power of 3D story: desire, difficulty, denouement. Now, whether you are ready and raring to go and need some help and you want to reach out and shoot us an email at Go Narrative, then please do. But if you want to take the next step, but you're not quite ready to engage another human being on it yet, then go ahead and download the first play of the Storytelling for Action playbook. And it's very practical. It's all, in fact, it's not, there's no e-version because it's sit down, get a pen out and actually work through creating your story. And the Power of 3D Story is the first chapter. You can get that from gonarrative.com. And you can also get the book. So you can go ahead and get the book from Amazon and you can get the paper and start doing it. It's like $25 or something, and it will help you level up your story. And of course, I would love to hear from you. And I would love to hear the story you're telling today. I'd love to hear your story. And remember, we've got that brand new offering, the 45-minute surgical story sprint. Within that time, you'll come in with your story. You'll have discovered your why because I'll have had you do that before we connect, and your story type. Where are you now? Are you the challenge, the pivot? And we will dig into your story, and I will help you tell your story better. And shoot us an email. We'll tell you it's a very, very affordable amount to get going on this one. And then, of course, there's lots of options beyond that. We've got a handful to keep it simple, but we've got story discovery, which we can build on if you do that first session, or you can just go straight into the story discovery and get your written story, one pager. Or if you're ready to do it as a team, we've got Story Accelerator. So we can apply Story Accelerator to Series B Story Accelerator, right? Let's get your story ready for that next round. Figure out what those motivational drivers are for your leadership team. Understand the transformation in the market, how you connect to that, and do all of those things and package it up in your company's story. And of course, then you want to take your team on the journey. And that's why we have Storytelling for Action. And all of this can be applied immediately, even just after watching today. So what do I want you to do next? I want you to think about what story you're going to tell tomorrow. What story is it? What are you going to tell? And then I want you to tell 3 people, and I want you to tell it as desire, difficulty, denouement. And then where the magic happens is I want you to describe using those words, introduce them to that fancy French word, denouement, the untangling of the knot, and share with them that this is the desire of our target audience. This is the difficulty that stands in the way of our target audience. This is the denouement of our target audience and how they untangle that knot and how we help. It could be about your audience, could be investors. It doesn't have to be a customer. But what story will you tell tomorrow? And do that 3 times in 72 hours, and you will never forget the power of 3D story. And you can start using it immediately. And as you start to use it, I guarantee you, you're going to want to reach out and get a bit of help applying it, because you know what? I can walk, thankfully. I'm not a runner, and I certainly have no interest in running marathons. So storytelling is like that, right? We can all walk with storytelling, but not all of us can run a marathon. You do have the ability to be a storytelling marathon runner, but it takes time and steps and practice. The good news is you can go out for a light jog with everything I've shared today, because all of us have that innate core ability, because storytelling is at the heart of what we do as human beings, because it is our operating system. Put quite plainly, storytelling is happening to us every single day. The stories I shared with you on the track yesterday, I was living them, and now I can tell them, right? With our business, we can intentionally make them, right? Figure out, make that story that we want our investors to believe, then go live that story. And then hopefully we'll be telling that story in the not too distant future. So go ahead and reach out. Thank you so much for joining today. We answer every email, gnhelp@gonarrative.com. And I look forward to hearing what story you're trying to tell. And until next time, I'll see you next Friday with a special guest from Descript. And we're going to keep telling stories, and we're going to keep figuring out how we get from Series A to Series B and beyond, and figuring out how to tell the best founding stories that we can. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon.